I did call my chat this afternoon Follow the Entrepreneur because although I run a venture capital firm called Ariadne Capital, Ariadne, of course, was the Greek princess. She helped Theseus get through the labyrinth with the golden thread. So that's what we view is our role is to follow the entrepreneur and to help the entrepreneur. And although I am a venture capitalist, I really feel like a spy for the other side because I'm an entrepreneur first and foremost. And that's what we view as our differentiation at Ariadne Capital, is that we recognize that it's all about the entrepreneur. Our job is to follow the entrepreneur, and there are a lot of venture capitalists who really think that it's all about them and it's all about the money. So what I'm going to try to do this afternoon is to give you a pair of glasses for looking at what I call entrepreneur country. What's entrepreneur country? It's, first of all, I have a book coming out called Entrepreneur Country, so my book is going to come out at Easter time called Welcome to Entrepreneur Country. If you go to entrepreneurcountry.com, that's our community of entrepreneurs. Most entrepreneurs feel that they go to a different country every day. They feel that that really the kind of day in, day out of what entrepreneurs deal with, the kind of near-death experiences meets breakthrough moments, that kind of is very far away from what the rest of society understands. So we've created a place where entrepreneurs can share. And I kind of came to the conclusion over the course this past couple of years as we've been watching all these crazy things happening in the world of saying, well, what's really happening in society? And I think society is being reorganized around the entrepreneur. And I think everybody is going to entrepreneur country, not just the entrepreneurs. But that's where, if we fast forward about 10 years' time, I think that we're going to be looking at a very different social contract, if you will, between the entrepreneur, the individual, corporates, big business, and government. So that's what you will find at Entrepreneur Country. I'm going to give you a couple of insights from key thinkers who are framing this next age and share with you what we believe at Ariadne Capital to be the next industrial model and give you some ideas on how to build a global leading firm. So just a quick point on the messenger, because the messenger is part of the message. These are some of the companies that we've backed over the past 11 years of Ariadne Capital history. We've spotted a couple of key trends and worked with some entrepreneurs that have built some global businesses. And I'm going to tell you more about that business monetized a little bit later in the slide presentation. I guess I start with the idea that capital follows ideas. And hopefully that's pretty obvious for you all. But that's where I think the starting point really needs to be, is that throughout history, whether or not Leonardo da Vinci or Christopher Columbus, that group of the entrepreneurial class of people, the people who create and develop, and the architects and the adventurers, the entrepreneurs, the industrialists, those people have always been backed by the financiers of their day, right? I think that's quite important because while I know we have some people in the room who've recently sold their businesses, others of you may be starting out. I know when I was 23 years old and I had shown up to Paris and been in a foreign country at age 23, I remember being completely obsessed that I had no money until somebody kind of said to me, stop, just stop focusing on the fact that you have no money. If you focus on communicating and executing your ideas, the money will find you. And I thought at age 23 that was a completely ridiculous thing to say, and I told this person that. But you know what? It's really true. The less you focus on the money and the more you focus on communicating and executing your ideas, the more the money finds you. And I think Rushlight seems to be doing a pretty good job of making that happen as well. We see so many entrepreneurs come through at Ariadne Capital, and maybe the experience of Webb and Capricorn on the panel will share that with you as well. They focus on what they don't have, the money. And really, money is like a heat-seeking missile. It's just trying to find the best return in the market. And so you have to, as an entrepreneur, demonstrate that you're going to provide that return. So we never forget that at Ariadne Capital, that capital follows ideas throughout history. It always has, and it always will. So financiers have always backed the industrialists of the day. And I view finance and technology just really as tools. You need both to create high-growth businesses. I would argue you can't possibly be a high-growth business today unless you have access to an appropriate amount of finance. Not huge amounts, and in reality that's one of the main differences, say, compared to about 12 years ago, to both technology and finance. So who are the new industrialists of the digital age? And I view those new industrialists really as the digital entrepreneurs. And I would argue that to be an entrepreneur today, a high-growth firm, that you are by definition a digital industrialist or you're not high growth. And entrepreneurship is really a game of asymmetrical warfare. Now, I met earlier today one of my investors, because Ariadne has at its core 50, actually it's now 58, leading entrepreneurs as my founding shareholders at Ariadne Capital. They are people like the founders of Betfair, Hotmail, all sorts of people like that, and some other private equity entrepreneurs. And Paul Barry Walsh, who is an IT entrepreneur in this country, he said something very interesting. He said small businesses are really funding big businesses in this country. If you stop to think about that, it's quite a statement to say small businesses are really funding big businesses. But a lot of small businesses that do deals with larger corporates don't get paid for like 90 to 120 days, which can provide quite a lot of cash flow. Maybe some of you, cash flow problems, that is. Maybe some of you caught, as I did, what I thought was a rather ridiculous settlement between HMRC and Vodafone and Goldman Sachs on the tax front. I know that really, if you're a small business and you see that the big boys are getting off on cutting deals with their fancy lawyers, and as a small business, your fixed cost, the first fixed cost you worry about every month is paying the money to PAYE and national insurance. It's pretty hard to stomach. So there is actually some evidence to suggest that small businesses not only are the growth, the engine of society, right? All of that Nesta Innovations Agency, vital 6%, creating 54% of all new jobs, but actually in many respects they're funding the big companies in the market. So in so many ways, entrepreneurship is a game of asymmetrical warfare. You've got David and his slingshot, right? I love that guy. I love the face. That's the face of every entrepreneur. He or she may not show you that face, but never forget, if you're dealing with an entrepreneur, that's the face that drives them inside, is they're going to show you. They are David and his slingshot, and they're going to sling that rock right across and hit you. And never forget the ending to the story, right? David wins. David gets Goliath, right? So in his or her mind's eye, they have already won the prize and everything else is execution. But that's what's driving entrepreneurs. And that harnessing that energy towards that goal is really is why we get through the near-death experiences to the breakthrough moments. And we call that, at Ariadne Capital, we call that entrepreneur country. Now, the global entrepreneurship model has changed. I'll be really interested to hear from the venture capitalists on the panel later how they perceive this. When I first came to the UK back in 1998, early on, and working through that whole kind of dot-com, the early dot-com period, there was a lot of money flushing about. The very first deal that I did was helping Brent and Martha get funded at lastminute.com, and we did a Series A funding round of 6 million sterling to get lastminute.com off the ground. Now, to do that today, you would do that for like 300,000, wouldn't you? Right? The cost of technology has come way down. Companies are being created which are fast, flexible, powerful, distributed, but ultimately not expensive. And we probably all have friends that are getting beta products up and running, things like Launch 48, Startup Weekend, for very small amounts of money. So I'm going to walk through those 5 stages of company growth. But technology has become standardized and componentized. And I'm really interested in your thoughts, as well as the panelists, on how that's happening in clean tech, because that is the biggest shifter of value in the digital space. What used to be called TMT, but now is this kind of broader space of high-growth businesses, is the fact that you no longer are recreating technology. It is there, it's off the shelf, it's in the cloud. To the point that I would actually say businesses that were created pre-2005, the biggest mistake, and you can't really call it a mistake because it was just simply part of what was happening in the market, is that they were having to raise a lot more funding to execute their business plan. A case in point, Zopa, peer-to-peer lending and borrowing company that we did an investment in 2005. They raised some 15 million sterling. You may know another company called Funding Circle, which is roughly in the same space, to do something very similar, raised, I think, just shy of £1 million. So the levels of funding, because of that technology decrease, are huge. So how will digital ideas shape our lives over the next 10 years? Now, it used to be way back, 20 years ago when I worked advising companies like Motorola, it used to be you would experience new technology, whether it was a new laptop in the office, it would be, you'd find that you'd experience new technology products and services in the enterprise. That obviously has really changed now. You buy your iPad, your iPhone, whatever you might buy as an individual, as a consumer first, and you walk that into the office. And that consumerization of technology has been well documented. It changes completely how new products and services enter the market and how you have to market products to them. We experienced that through the work that we did with Skype in early 2003 and 2004. Before Nicholas and Janice got funded, we were working with them on a business development capacity, and we could see as those numbers were skyrocketing and Skype was being forced into the enterprise, people loved the free calls on the web call to action, right? The proposition worked, and it really started that whole trend of shifting us towards this consumerization of technology. So that's quite well documented. This is a little bit more, it may seem quite far away from where you were, but I would argue it's quite relative to clean tech and smart cities. This is a quote by Iqbal Kadir, who's the founder of the Grameen phone. And Iqbal said, and I kind of picked this out of something that I heard him say, and I've now met him a couple of times, but he says capitalism was about empowered authority, which didn't necessarily activate the citizenry. The internet stands that on its head and shifts the power to the individual, making individual capitalism the force of the 21st century. Back to that initial statement that I made about, I think society is being remade. There's a new social contract which is emerging. You can see a kind of trend happening here, the consumerization of technology, individual capitalism, a lot more focus on the empowerment of individuals. Key question is when government is going to understand that. Then there's a great book by Clay Shirky who's written How Cognitive Surplus, which is the name of his book, Will Change the World. And he talks about the great spare time revolution. He says, where did we get those 100 million hours that it has taken to build Wikipedia, which is, growing rapidly? Well, it turns out that we're watching less TV. Everything is moving to a two-way model rather than broadcast, right? Nobody wants to just listen to me speak. You want to challenge what I say or tell me that it resonates. Everything is a two-way discussion. So cognitive surplus, this idea is that there is a cognitive surplus of customers out there, customers of your future businesses. How can you leverage their mind share to help you bring your product and service to market? But if there's one concept that I really hope that you'll take away from today's presentation, is one that, again, may seem obvious, but I think it's fundamental to not just business, but to life and, frankly, to the world today, is that there's a fundamental network orientation to everything today. There isn't anything which is left which is linear or hierarchical. And you can go across industries from the record industry, which we're operating with artists in a very top-down, hierarchical, linear fashion. We're big, you're small, artists deal with it, those are the economics. And we all saw where that led the record industry to be. You could look at almost any industry and to see whether or not the Goliath institutions, the established businesses, have figured out that the world has gone network or if they're still operating in a linear fashion. And you can almost use that as a metric to see whether or not they're understanding and moving to understand how digital business models are going to transform their industry. So this is the backdrop to much of what we're going to talk about moving forward. Now, how many of you have heard of The Singularity is Near in that book? Anybody read Kurzweil's book? Kind of quite at a high level, he talks about how technology operates exponentially while our minds operate linearly. So picking up on that, on the network orientation and the implicit network effects once you're able to harness that network orientation. But what he describes is how it took 89 years for the fixed line telephone to achieve adoption of 150 million users, 38 years for the television to get to the same point. The mobile phone achieved this in 14 years, the iPod in 7, Facebook in 5, and you can see where this is going, right? So he calculates that we'll have 20,000 years of progress this century, and at a certain point we have to leverage technology or artificial intelligence just to stay ahead of the curve. Now what this says to me is that as humans we need to create a wrapper, a structure, an architecture to how not only we manage our lives but how we manage the interface between humans and technology. And then finally, Carlota Perez, who's a Venezuelan economist. She's based in Sussex but works at Cambridge university. And I started reading Carlota Perez because she had this concept of the freeformer, which was essentially the individual capitalist. And I started reading that when we were advising Zopa and doing that investment in 2005. And she also has this theory of technological disruption and adoption. She basically has looked over the past couple hundred years and noticed that roughly every 60 years there's a moment of disruptive technology. And she's gone through that and done all the research and the history and so forth. And sure enough, if I think back to when I came to the United Kingdom and that whole first wave of what First Tuesday was, bringing together the internet entrepreneurs who were all going to just annihilate the establishment, right? Every internet entrepreneur, it felt like in 1998, 1999, was, watch out, name your big company, your history, we're going to take over the sector. And it didn't quite work that way, did it? Right? So, but it was this kind of game of David and Goliath, technological revolutionaries. That's not what's happening today. Today, what we have is David and Goliath doing a dance, okay? So if you follow Carlota's theory of disruptive technology and adoption, she talks about those moments of disruptive technology going all the way through history. The next phase of that, though, is that these social and economic institutions embed that technology into our lives, and they just keep on penetrating that technology into our lives, but we don't think of it as technology anymore. And so if you think back to the period in 2001 or 2002, where we went through that telecoms downturn, the dot-com bust, right? Or even in 2008, 2009, where there was no correlation. You had mobile and broadband technologies continuing to penetrate our lives and more people online, and yet you had a huge financial crisis, right? So there's no correlation between how social and economic institutions embed the technology into our lives and what's happening on the financial markets. And today I would argue that in a very simplistic way, but that David-Goliath framework is what's happening in the market, and that is very empowering to both David and Goliath. So really quickly, we see this structure to industry today, and again, I'm curious as to how that happens for the clean tech investors and entrepreneurs, is I see 5 very distinct stages of company development. And I would argue that industries have to have a structure, otherwise you can't get everybody to understand where you are, what milestone you've achieved. Each time you sit down, entrepreneur to investor, you're trying to establish whether or not you're looking at the same milestone. If we have, for just a moment, take another industry that the UK is quite well known for, the creative industries. And people are always talking about how do we get more investment into there, how do we create more global leaders and so forth. I would argue that one of the reasons we don't is because we don't have this kind of structure which rolls across it, so that entrepreneurs that are starting out know exactly where they are, and investors can come in, and the acquirers and everybody understand the grid. So really quickly, the concept stage, or phase 1, if you will, is the concept. You have an idea, and lots of people have ideas. I call this the dinner party stage. People have ideas and they talk to each other over Saturday night dinner parties about the idea that they would do with their business, right? And in 99% of the cases, nothing happens beyond the Saturday night dinner party where they talk about the idea. If they were made redundant, they would take the money and go set up a firm, right? So you've got some people with ideas in phase 1. Some people then get off their backsides and get a beta product out and running. And that is, the cost of doing that has come way down. You can do that in some cases for £500, in some cases for 50,000. Sometimes it takes you up to 5 million, but the cost has come way down over the past couple of years. So that's the stage that at least Ariadne engages with entrepreneurs, is when there's a product. You can actually see this is the embodiment of the insight into consumer behavior, with the focus on consumer, right? Because it is a consumer insight, even if you're operating in a B2B space. Now, the third stage is around business model validation, or how you tax that consumer insight, right? And I would argue you have to separate it out, because you could have a correct insight into the product, into the behavior, but an incorrect insight into how you tax that behavior. And unless you separate it out, you don't know which one's right and which one's wrong, right? So we take companies through that phase 1 to phase 2, phase 2 to phase 3 rather. The big difference, however, is really around scaling businesses. In the areas that we primarily work, in digital technologies, no venture capitalist is going to give you 30 million sterling to go acquire 30 million customers. You're going to have to do that on the back of partnerships. You're going to have to engage the large Goliath enterprises and to do partnership deals with those. Now, the other huge phenomena, of course, are ecosystem clusters like, Apple, Android, Google, Amazon, and so forth. Those are obviously big scale partners to get the huge scale as well. So phase 4 is a critical. It's much easier to get into the game, much more difficult to scale accordingly. Phase 5 could be exit. We have entrepreneurs in the room which have just exited their businesses. More importantly, it's cash profitability. It's sustainable. It could be when you sell your business, it could be when you exit, or it could just be when you can, as an entrepreneur, breathe out, right? You're sustainable. You don't have to, you're not driving that train at 200 miles an hour anymore. So I think these are the 5 stages of company development. And if I think about let's just take LinkedIn for just a moment as a well-known company. LinkedIn started roughly kind of 12 years ago. It understood fundamentally the network orientation to business, right? Fundamentally, it's a network. He had a correct insight into consumer behavior that everybody's always looking for a job, right? Not everybody will put their CV on a recruitment board, but everybody is always looking to be connected to other people, right? It's the serendipity which drives the world. So the insight into consumer behavior was correct. The business model, obviously, he figured that out in terms of there's multiple stakeholders there, and he understood how to drive that business model. And then he scaled. Now, we have to assume that somewhere along the way, LinkedIn maybe had offers from recruitment companies or media companies that wanted to acquire. We'll probably never know, right? But the main reason why the company gets valued at the extreme valuation that it does, the premium going through, is because when it starts out in this network-oriented world, you start at an enormous discount. You are enormously vulnerable at the beginning. If you're operating in a network-oriented world, that means there's multiple stakeholders. You're not just selling something in a one-to-one fashion. You're organizing and aligning a set of stakeholders, which is very difficult to do. If it doesn't happen, you have nothing. You're completely vulnerable. But what happens when you do it is you flip into a world of profound network effects. And I'm going to show you that with another company. That's why, as you go through from phase 1 to phase 5, you achieve a real premium if you make it all the way through. Because it is not easy to do. It is not an insignificant action to make it all the way through phase 1 to phase 5. So at anywhere along the line, you can go splat and hit the wall off the tracks, and any entrepreneur in the room will understand what I mean by a near-death experience, right? It can happen at any point. We've all known people that are really well-connected, hard-working, smart, and something comes out of the woodwork, slaps them across the side, and there they go. Near-death experience kills the company. It's not fair. There's no guarantee. We see these David and Goliath deals. I've just picked 2 from about a year ago. These Davids, which are doing deals with large Goliath businesses, taking advantage of their distribution. We see these all over the market. And I would argue, and I think from my brief discussion with Clive earlier at Rushlight, I think this is one of the key things that has to happen in the clean tech world, is to get the large corporates to recognize they provide the distribution, they provide the scale to the digital entrepreneurs in the clean tech space. And until we start seeing more and more of these David and Goliath deals in clean tech, we're not going to be creating as many game changers as we want to. So we never forget that innovation is really about economics. It's not about technology. If it were, we'd all be, we'd all be bundled into the Concorde. We're not. We're thrown into jumbo jets. It's really about the economics which drives innovation, not the technology. So I would put to you that ecosystem economics, which is kind of our house way of saying it at Ariadne, is the new industrial model. The companies who understand their role in their ecosystem. So where you would say industry or vertical before, think ecosystem today. The companies understand their role in the ecosystem and who are able to organize the business model for the ecosystem will win. Technology is not the point. Business model is the game changer. How do you build a successful business? Here's the key. Make it in other people's interest for you to be successful. Talk more about that. So this fine gentleman, people talk about the beautiful products that Apple made, and I'm a big Apple fan. His real legacy is not going to be the products. It's going to be that he took on the mobile carriers, he took on the music industry, which you could argue both of them were waiting to be taken on, and explained in a multi-stakeholder world how the economics were going to be shared across his multiple dependencies. He reorganized the business model, the economics, not the technology, right? And that's why Apple has the premium that they do today. If we think about Google, Google say that they organize the world's information. They actually organize the economics of the world's information. And I and you as consumers of search are not given any economic upside in the transaction. They use our data, albeit anonymously, but they aggregate our data, and we get free search. Isn't that great? They use our data, and we're given no economic upside in the transaction, and they built a multi-billion-pound business off the back of that. I find that actually stunning that more people don't jump up and down and actually, refuse to play ball with that. Our data is being used. Our data, which should be an inalienable right of ours, is being used, and no economic value is being given to us. So their biggest Achilles heel is if someone in the search space were able to cut a different set of economics for the consumer. And I found that entrepreneur. His name is John Paleomolites. He runs a company called Beat That Quote. It's a price comparison financial services company here in the United Kingdom. And we sold that company to Google. Ariadne acted as its advisor in March 2011. Now, this is a business that had £250,000 of EBITDA, not a lot. It was doing cashback deals, closing the loop, giving people an economic value for the use of their data. And for a company with £250,000 of EBITDA, we sold it for 37.7 million sterling to Google. Now, why would they buy a company for 122 times EBITDA multiple unless it cut to the heart of what was going on with their business model? So the economic value of your data, and I would argue this is a unique opportunity in clean tech, because clean tech for me is the use of energy. It's what's happening in the kitchen, in the car, in the farm, in the field. There's a unique opportunity for the economic value of your data. So how do you launch a global business, make it in the interest of your natural allies to succeed? I think people too frequently, both in corporates when they're launching products, or David, who's playing that asymmetrical game of warfare, fail to ask themselves, in whose interest is it that I'm successful, right? I'm small, I'm David, I've got a big vision, I want to take over the world. In whose interest is it for me to be successful? Those are my natural allies. They can be companies in partners in adjacent industries. They can be companies who've kind of lost their way and need a new story. They can be other entrepreneurs. They can be all sorts of people. But this is the key exercise to do, the natural allies test, to figure out in whose interest is it that you have to give them a cut of the economics or a cut of the transaction and pull them into your transaction so they pull you into the market. So Monetize is a company that we've backed for 7 years. Who's heard of Monetize in the market? I hope most of you have, and you're just not raising your hand. Monetize is actually worth $500 million. Alistair Lukes, the CEO, is one of this country's most extraordinary entrepreneurs. Very simple proposition. From the bank, your bank account, where your money is, via any mobile carrier, any device, completely agnostic on all levels, enables you to transfer money from your bank account, remit cash overseas, pay for things, check your balance, right? You don't need to transfer money to a PayPal account or whatever. The most natural interaction possible. So they've created this mobile money ecosystem backed by Visa 5 times, servicing 250 financial institutions. Every 20 seconds, somebody in the world is using a Monetize service. Monetize sits in the middle of that transaction, and they organize the economics for the banks, the mobile carriers, and they just take a cut every time somebody pulls money out of their bank account and transmits it to somebody. They're playing the industry architect role, and as a result of these ecosystem economics, they've created a global footprint. They told the banks, we're not trying to disrupt you, we're trying to enable you to get into the world of mobile money. So what we're looking for is the conviction and audacious plans, plus humility and accountability, all those good kind of characteristics that good entrepreneurs have. And what we say is follow the entrepreneur. He or she has the market insight, is the value creator, is the hero. So just final word from Steve Jobs to share with you this afternoon. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs and the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. about the only thing you can't do is to ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.